so 10.3 continued today. We want to make sure we understand that the points on a unit circle, they are given as cosine and sine. So cosine is your x, sine is your y. And then what we just went over is where functions were positive. This is going to tell you where they're positive and where they're negative. This is going to be a really great thing to use today. So this told you how to remember. All students take classes. So this is where they're positive, if you need to remember that on a test or quiz. Everything's positive, quadrant 1, sine, quadrant 2, tangent, quadrant 3, cosine, quadrant 4. This one is nice because it does tell you which ones are negative as well. Okay, so if they're not positive, they are negative. Okay, so now we're going to use this to help us find different measures. Okay, do you guys need any more time getting that copied down? Okay, so the first one, you are going to need your unit circle, so don't put that away, okay? So you have the cosine of 225. So when it says convert each measure, all we're going to do is find the cosine value at 225. So remember, your cosine is your x coordinate. So all we have to do is find the x value at 225 degrees. All right, so I want you to go to your unit circle. I want you to find 225 degrees. So the unit circle that you just made, and go to your 225. What is your x value at 225? Yep, so if that is your x value at 225, your answer is just negative root 2 over 2. And yes, that's it. Okay, so you just have to interpret what does the cosine mean, what does the sine mean, what does the tangent mean. Okay, so for B, I want you to write down the sine of 315. Okay, I'll give you a minute to find that. How do we do? Okay, so if it's the sine, what coordinate do you have to use? You have to use the y. So be careful, because I think some of us may have found the x. Okay, so sine is the y value. Okay, and we have to go to 315. Okay, that's why it's important that you checked also your solutions. So at 315, here's your x, here's your y. Okay, so your y value is negative root 2 over 2. They're the same thing, and yes, it's okay, because there are several points that have that. So make sure you guys have the negative and that you didn't put down your x value, okay? Okay, questions for me on A or B? All right, now we're going to do a different function. So the next one is the tangent of 5 pi over 6. So remember, for the tangent, to find the tangent, what do? Yep, we're going to have to divide. Sine over cosine, okay, or y over x. Okay, so let's find the point at 5 pi over 6. Now I know that you guys are searching on your unit circle for 5 pi over 6. Here's a little hint to help you find it quicker. 5 pi over 6, is that greater than pi or less than pi? Less, because pi is what? 6 pi over 6, right? That would be 1 pi, 6 over 6, correct? So 5 pi over 6 should be in quadrant 2. Okay, so 5 pi over 6 is right here. So here's my point. I'm just going to write down my point. Negative root 3 over 2, positive 1/2, and then I'm going to divide. So here's my x, here's my y. And is it okay if I do 1/2 times the reciprocal right away? Okay, so times negative 2 over root 3. So dividing is like multiplying by the reciprocal. So the 2's cancel. You have negative 1 over root 3. What is that going to simplify to? Yep. And that is your final answer. Okay, what questions do we have? Alright. Let's try the tangent of 180 degrees. So when you're doing the tangent of 180, think about where this is on the unit circle. You'll see me drawing pictures often to represent where these are. So do you guys know that 180 is going to be right here? What's that point?
Negative 1, 0.
Yes, good. Negative 1, 0. So if you are finding the tangent, you are going to be dividing y over x. And so your y value is 0. And then negative 1. 0 divided by negative 1 is 0. Okay, now we are going to just put a little note. So remember, if 0 is in the denominator, then the solution is what? If you had 0 in the denominator, what would your solution be?
Undefined.
Yes. Okay, so the reason why we're writing down this note is that's usually something people forget when they go to do the homework. Okay, so remember if 0 is in the denominator, that's fine, it's just undefined. Okay? Alright, and then let's try this one. So you can also have this function, the secant of 4 pi over 3. So let's review what that means. The secant is related to another function. You guys remember what function it's related to? It's related to cosine. Now, let's make sure we get the right word. So it's not the inverse, it's the what? Reciprocal. Good. It's also not the opposite. Those are the most interchanged words. We're actually going to do inverses in 10-4. So we'll talk about that a little bit further. But the reciprocal means that you do what? Okay, yep. And then if it's a whole number, so she said flip the numerator and denominator. Yes, yep. So this is the reciprocal of cosine, which means the secant of theta is equal to 1 over the cosine of theta. Okay, so what that means is if we're trying to find the secant of 4 pi over 3, we can find the cosine of 4 pi over 3 and put it over 1 or find the reciprocal. Okay? So let's find the cosine of 4 pi over 3. And think about that. Is that greater than pi or is that less than pi? Greater. Because pi would be 3 pi over 3. Right? So that's going to be in what quadrant? No? 3. Yep. So I always think of pi because that's something that's an easier frame of reference. So here's 4 pi over 3. Which one is going to be the cosine? Negative 1/2. It's going to be the x value. Okay? So this is going to be negative 1/2. And then there's two ways you can think about this. If you do 1 divided by negative 1/2, that's just 1 times negative 2. You can also think of it as the reciprocal of negative 1 over 2 is negative 2 over 1, right? So you can either divide it, 1 divided by the cosine. So 1 divided by the cosine value, 1 divided by cosine. Yep. Or you can do the reciprocal. If you flip it, it becomes negative 2 over 1. Don't leave it like that. What's negative 2 divided by 1? Negative 2. Okay, so whichever way you do that is fine. Okay, but negative 2 is your final answer. Okay, are there any questions you can think of for me right now? It's definitely going to take some practice. So like I said, there's so many different types. So we've only done the secant, but you could be given the cosecant, the cotangent, tangent, sine, cosine. Okay, so there's a lot of different types of equations, and the only way you can get better at that is exposure to the different types. All right, now on the next page, we're going to be using a reference angle. So we talked about reference angles earlier in chapter 10. Okay, and we're going to use those reference angles to find the exact values. So an exact value just means that it's not what? Exact values are not decimals. Okay, so keep it as a fraction, keep it as a radical. Okay, so here are your steps. The first thing you're going to do is find the measure of the reference angle. Once you do that, you are going to use quadrant 1 of the unit circle to find the sine, the cosine, or tangent of the reference angle. Okay, and then the last thing that you're going to do is adjust the signs. So when you adjust the sign, it's based on the quadrant of your terminal side. Okay, and the terminal side is just where we end up. All right, so for A, you have to do these steps for 330 degrees, okay? The first thing we're going to do, step 1, is I just want you to graph 330. Okay, so we did that in 10.2. You guys feel like you can do that, the 330? Okay, so start at the initial side, and then 330 is going to be in what quadrant? Quadrant 4. Okay, and it's going to look like this. 330 degrees. Okay, so this is the terminal side. It ends up in quadrant 4. Please make a note of that. What is your reference angle going to be? 30. How do you know? It always has to be the smallest angle to your x-axis, right? Okay, so if this is 330, we know that the reference angle is 30 degrees. Okay, so yeah, 330 plus 30 would give you the 360. Okay, now your step 2 is to find the sine, the cosine, and the tangent of the reference angle. So we're going to find the sine of 30, the cosine of 30, and the tangent of 30. And I'll tell you right now what the first question on your quiz is going to look like. Okay, so the first question on your quiz is going to look just like this. Well, when you have your quiz, but Your quiz will be next week. I believe it's Wednesday. Yes. I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's Wednesday. Okay, so this is exactly what it'll look like. It'll look like this. They will be blank. You will be filling in all those points. You'll be filling in this point. You'll be filling in this point. And then you'll have to tell me all the degrees, all the points, and all the radians. Okay? So you'll have to fill in the degrees. So 0, 30, 45, 60, 90. That'll be part of it. The next part will be the radians. So what's the first radian? What's the first radian? What's at 0 degrees? It's what? 0. Okay. At 30 degrees, it's 5 over 6. What about at 45? 5 over 4, 60, 5 over 3, and 90, 5 over 2. All right. Now, do we remember what this point is? 1, 0. Yep. And this one is 0, 1. So yesterday I taught you guys some tricks. Do you remember what we talked about? The denominators? The denominators are all what? 2. So you can just do that really quick. And then do you guys remember the trick I taught you about the top? No? 1, 2, 3. They're all the square roots. Good. So how do I know which one is 1? Do I start with 1 here or 1 here? And the x or the y? Y. Do you know why? Because you're 0. You have 0 right here, right? So we start at 0. And it's the square root of 1, which is 1. The square root of 2, square root of 3. And then you just go the opposite way. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 2, square root of 3. Okay? You have that written down. Oh. Well, thank you very much. Okay, so all you have to do now is once you have, like I said, this will be your first question, so just look at this. At 30 degrees, what's the sine value? Is your sine the x or the y? The y. So the sine is 1/2. What's the cosine? Root 3 over 2, because that's the x. And then do you guys remember, we just wrote down the tangent. Do you guys remember what the first tangent is? Root 3 over 3, yes. And you won't have to put the tangents on there, but we did just write them down. We just wrote down root 3 over 3, 1, root 3. Okay? All right, and that's step 2. You'll have one on your quiz like this. I'll have the steps set up just like this. Step 1, you'll graph it. Step 2, you'll find the sine, the cosine. Step 3 says use the chart at the top of the page. Use the chart on the front to help you. So just signs if you need to. Okay, so this is based on the quadrant. So we wrote that this was in quadrant 4. So in quadrant 4, what is positive? Do you guys remember? All students take classes. The cosine is positive. Good. So cosine is positive. What about the sine? Sine is negative. And the tangent is negative. Okay, so if you need help with that, I said we can just look on the front. So on the front, in quadrant 4, sine is negative, cosine is positive, tangent is negative. Okay? All right, so then all we have to do is adjust this. So what we're going to write is the sine of 330, the cosine of 330, the tangent of 330, and all we have to do are adjust the signs. Okay, so your sign is negative, okay? So if this is 1/2, the adjustment is negative 1/2. And then your cosine, Okay, root 3 over 2, it's positive, so that's root 3 over 2. And then the tangent is now negative, so negative root 3 over 3. And this is your final answer. So remember, it's the 330 because that's what your question was, finding it 330. Okay, but we're using our reference angle, and then we're just adjusting it because of those special patterns. Okay, can you think of some questions you have for me? All right, then let's try it with 270. All right, 270, where's that? It's actually not in a quadrant, right? Where is 270?
The bottom.
Yeah, it's right here, right? It's on this line, the 270 is. So I was blabbing about this in the early chapters. I was telling you your reference angle could be what? No,
Oh,
90 degrees. And isn't this one 90 degrees? Yep. Okay, so this is where your reference angle is 90. This is a special case. It only happens when you're on the line, okay, but your reference angle is 90, okay? So that is step 1, is finding your reference angle. And step 2, all we have to do is find the sine of 90, the cosine of 90, and the tangent of 90. So when we do that, it is helpful to think about your circle and where 90 is. 90 degrees is at the very top of the circle, right? What is that point? 0, 1. Okay, so the sine would be what? 1. Good. Okay, so your sine is 1 because that's the y. The cosine is x. What's our x? 0. The tangent is y divided by x. So 1 divided by 0 is undefined, and that's what you're going to have. Questions about finding the sine, cosine, or tangent of 90? Okay, and then your third step is to adjust to the quadrant. But guess what? This isn't on a quadrant, or in a quadrant, it's on a line. So what we have to do is we have to follow where this is located. So 270 is located here. Okay, so this is not in a quadrant. Okay, but it is on the negative part of what axis? Yes, so it's the negative side of your y-axis. So what that means is that your y value is negative. Okay, and then your y value is the same thing as sine. Okay, so your y value slash the sine value is negative. Okay, so that means your sine of, what was our original problem? What's our original value? 270, so we're going to plug in 270. So the y value, the sine is negative. So instead of 1, we have negative 1. That's the only thing that's negative here. Okay, your cosine is going to stay 0, and this is going to stay undefined. Okay, you couldn't make 0 or undefined negative anyway. Okay, so you are only going to do that with the sine. Okay, now if you wanted to, you could check this on your unit circle. You could check either one on your unit circle, okay? But make sure you know how to do that by writing this out, so using that reference angle. Okay, but you absolutely could check. Now, Sometimes you might be given a value in radians. So negative 3 pi over 4 is what we're going to do next. Now you may be thinking, how am I going to graph negative 3 pi over 4? Okay, especially when we're new at this. It's going to take a little bit getting used to, but I'm going to show you a little shortcut, okay? So one way you can think about this is you can think of this as negative 3 times pi over 4. So what that means is I'm going to go pi over 4 3 times in the negative direction. Now yesterday we actually counted by pi over 4s. Do you guys remember what pi over 4 is as a degree? What's pi over 4 as a degree? 45 degrees, okay? So let's actually count over here and then we'll put it on there, all right? So draw a circle with me. Remember, you always start here, and we're just going to count 45 degrees 3 times, and if it's negative, do we go counterclockwise or clockwise? We start by going up or down? Clockwise, so we're going to go down. Okay, so do you guys agree if I start here that this would be the first 45 degrees? Okay, and then I would go a second 45 degrees, and then I would go a third 45 degrees. And that's where I would stop. So 1, 2, 3. So that's exactly where negative 3 pi over 4 is. Okay, so it's halfway here. This is negative 3 pi over 4. So again, we're just counting. We're thinking of this in degrees to make it a little bit easier. So we're getting used to radians. And then your reference angle is going to be this angle right here. Do you guys know what that is in degrees or radians? It's 45 degrees, which is how many radians? Yes. So this would be pi over 4. If you think about it in terms of degrees, like this was the 45, here to here would be 45. So it's going to be pi over 4. That's your reference angle. So if it is given to you in radians, you have to do your reference angle in radians. Okay, so you will have to do both. Now, what quadrant did we end up in? Yes. So I'm just going to make a note of that. Quadrant 3. Okay, and then this was my first step. So my second step is to find the sine, the cosine, and the tangent of the reference angle, which we just found out was pi over 4. So pi over 4 is the same thing as 45 degrees. So again, we can just use our first quadrant. Okay, and the sine and the cosine are the same. They're both root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. What's the tangent? What's the tangent at pi over 4? 1. Am I going too fast? Okay, and then our last step is just to adjust, okay? So when you are adjusting, you are just adjusting for the quadrant where you ended up. So you're going to adjust the signs to fit quadrant 3, okay? So in quadrant 3, what is positive? No, there's something. Yep, tangent is positive, which means the sine and the cosine are what? Negative. So normally I just write down the what is positive and then adjust. So this is sine of negative 3 pi over 4. This is cosine of negative 3 pi over 4. This is tangent of negative 3 pi over 4. Okay, so will you guys make those adjustments for me? Okay, so the tangent is positive, so that means the sine and the cosine are what?
Negative.
Okay, so can we just put our negatives in here? That might be something you could do on your test too, just on the line. Once you know what quadrants is, you can put those in there. So then it's just negative. This stays the same. This stays the same. And this is 1. Okay, so like I told you, this homework is going to be really important. It's page 711. And these really aren't very long. Okay, so if you're worried because you have a green match sheet, this is 10 through 17 and 27 through 34. And remember, some of them are as simple as finding the x coordinate on the unit circle or finding the y coordinate on the unit circle. Okay? So you guys can start that right now.